The Alaskan wilderness is a place of unforgiving beauty, an endless stretch of snow and silence, broken only by the restless whispers of the wind and the distant roar of icy waves crashing against black cliffs. Soldiers deployed there in the 1940s knew the land itself was hostile. Temperatures could kill you faster than bullets, and isolation could eat through your sanity in weeks. But on one assignment along a remote stretch of frozen coastline, a squad of young men discovered that Alaska was home to something more terrifying than frostbite or hunger. Locals had whispered about the Kushtaka, shapeshifters, that lurked near rivers and forests, half-adder, half-human tricksters, that lured travelers with cries of help before dragging them away to an existence worse than death. The soldiers didn't believe in folklore, not when their training told them to trust only discipline, weapons, and orders. But disbelief does not keep monsters at bay. The patrol began with uneasy jokes, their boots crunching over snow as they trudged into a fog that swallowed the world. Hours passed in silence until it was broken by the faintest sound, the voice of a woman crying for help. At first, they thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the cries grew clear pleading, broken, impossible to ignore. Against protocol, one soldier shouted back, his breath hanging like smoke. The cry answered. Something was out there in the dark. Would you have followed? They did, and the snow began to record their mistakes in footprints that slowly shifted shape as the men pushed deeper into the trees, their flashlights cutting weak tunnels through the storm. They found Nethano's stranded woman, no signs of camp, only animal tracks in the snow. But when they examined them closer, the prints weren't quite right. They began as human, bare feet pressed deep into frost, then warped into something different, wider, clawed, and wet as though fresh from water. One soldier muttered about the Kushtaka legend, a story he'd heard from an Inuit elder at the last outpost, and the others laughed it off nervously, though their eyes betrayed unease. That laugh would be the last they shared. A sudden scream shattered the silencer sound so raw and human that every hair on their necks rose. One of their squad had disappeared. His flashlight dropped in the snow, still burning a pale circle into the white ground. The men raised their rifles, firing into the forest at shadows that darted too fast, too low, too fluid to be human. The bullets cracked the stillness, but the forest answered with something worse than silence. Laughter. Not human laughter, not quite animal either, but a warped in-between sound that echoed and multiplied as though dozens of throats were mocking them from the trees. They dragged themselves back into formation, hearts racine, breaths sharp, but the forest seemed alive with movement. Their comrade's voice called out then his exact voice, begging them for help just beyond the next ridge. Against every instinct, two rushed forward, convinced their friend was alive. The others hesitated, but when they followed, all they found was blood and claw marks scarring the trees. Fear eats discipline quickly. The soldiers began to argue, accusing each other of hearing things that weren't real, of panicking too soon, of abandoning their missing comrades. That's when another figure stumbled into the clearing, face obscured by snow and shadow. It was their missing man. Or so it seemeth. He waved at them, pleading in a broken whisper, but something in the way he moved was wrong, as if every gesture was a parody of human motion, slightly delayed, slightly exaggerated. They rushed to him, weapons lowered, only to see his smile stretch wider than lips should allow, and his eyes glistened wet like an animal's, glowing faintly with a hunger that wasn't human. They fired, the body crumpled, and their relief was short-lived. When they turned the body over, it was him, their real comrade. They had killed one of their own, and in that moment, they realized the Kushtaka didn't need claws to destroy them. It used confusion, isolation, and fear to make them enemies of themselves. Panic became paranoia. Who was real? Who had already been taken? They began to see things, faces in the fog, figures crouched in branches above them, shapes darting through the snow that vanished when they fired. The Kushtaka were playing with them, luring them deeper, breaking them apart, pulling them toward the water's edge, where shadows writhed beneath the ice. By dawn, only 4 men remained, frostbitten, exhausted. Each one swore they heard voices calling their names, some of them from their mothers, some from children, some from comrades already dead. The cries tore at their sanity until one man broke and ran, disappearing into the storm, his screams ending in silence, too sudden to be natural. The three left stumbled back toward camp, guided only by instinct and terror. When they finally returned, their eyes hollow, lips blue. They refused to speak of what had happened, but the other soldiers stationed there noticed things. They noticed that the survivors didn't eat much, that they spent hours standing at the edge of the frozen river, staring at the water as though listening to something beneath. They noticed laughter, faint and strange, slipping out of the tents at night. And some swore their comrades' faces didn't look the same anymore. That their smiles were too wide, their eyes too wet, their voices just a little too perfect when they spoke. Rumors spread fast in camps like that. Some claimed the Kushtaka had let them return on purpose, wearing their bodies like clothes, walking among them unnoticed, patient for the right moment. Others swore they saw the survivors transform when the moonlight hit, their skin rippling like water, their features blurring as though they were no longer tethered to one shape. None of these stories were ever written down in official reports. The army didn't want to spread panic or admit that something beyond human understanding had broken its ranks. But the local people already knew. They warned outsiders for generations. The Kushtaka don't just hunt you, they consume what makes you human. And sometimes, the ones who return from the wilderness are not the ones who left. The story of Kushtaka versus soldiers. Terrifying Kushtaka Encounter has been retold for decades, sometimes dismissed as myth, sometimes whispered as fact. But in Alaska, where the nights stretch long and the land is older than memory, truth and legend bleed together. The Kushtaka remain part of living folklore, symbols of fear, loss of control, and the unknown lurking beyond the firelight. They embody what frightens us most. Not death, but transformation into something alien, something we can't recognize in ourselves. Imagine standing alone in the snow, hearing your mother's voice call you by name from the darkness, knowing if you follow, you will never come back the same. Imagine realizing that the soldier next to you, the friend you trusted with your life, is no longer the person you knew. These are fears that go beyond Alaska. They are universal. Fear of isolation, fear of losing our identity, fear that monsters were familiar faces. And that is why this story endures, why it keeps audiences awake long after the screen fades to black. Because the Kushtaka are not just creatures in the dark. They are reflections of our deepest nightmares, waiting in the silence, waiting in the snow, waiting to whisper our names. If you've made it this far, perhaps you feel a chill at the thought of stepping outside tonight, of hearing something in the dark that sounds too much like someone you love. That's the power of the Kushtaka. The terror behind the story of Kushtaka versus soldiers. Terrifying Kushtaka Encounter. But if you dare, don't stop here. There are darker stories, still creatures older than the Kushtaka. Shadows deeper than Alaska's forests. Nightmares that stretch across the world. Click here for the next tale. One that will drag you even further from the safety of the fire and into the unknown. Don't say, "I didn't warn you."